Hello, my name is Nathan, also known as the Journeyman Philosopher, and today I wanted to expand a little bit on something that I touched on briefly in a previous video, and this is the idea that everything is made up of energy. Now this is something that has been relatively firmly confirmed by modern science. We're pretty confident that this is actually the truth from a purely physics perspective. But I think it goes much further than has perhaps been explored so far in the realms of science. So to me, when you say that everything is energy, for most that have looked into this sort of idea, we're talking more about on a physical level. So you've got atoms, you've got electrons and neutrons and protons, and then you break those down into smaller and smaller and smaller components until eventually you are left with pure energy. And that certainly seems to be true. But if everything is made of energy, which is the way that this seems to be going, then surely that must apply on other levels too. And this is the area that I don't believe has been explored particularly well so far. This is certainly something that could be touched on more in the future. But to me, it makes sense that if everything on a physical level, everything we can see, touch, hear, feel, if that is all made of energy, and that includes things like sound waves, microwaves, visible light spectrum, non-visible light spectrum, all of these different aspects of the world around us, if all of that is made up of energy, then surely that means everything is made up of energy. If what we can see and what we can't see, what we can touch and what we can't touch, and if all of those things are made up of energy too, then it stands to reason that all of these things, which we have always kind of seen as not being a real thing, as far as not having a form in any such way, if everything is made of energy, if everything is a form of energy, then clearly those things must have an energetic form too. If they exist, if you can have a thought, it must be something. It must be a type of energy. So this was where I really started to ponder on how energy interacts with other energy. Because, this is the first rule of physics. Every contact leaves a trace. Everything that happens in the world affects everything around it. And so if a thought or a feeling, an emotion, an experience is made up of energy, clearly that must hold true for that as well. And I think this explains the phenomena that I'm sure all of us have some level of experience with, where you might be having a pretty good day yourself, and you come into contact with someone. It might be a work colleague, it might be a friend, it might be a family member who is having a bit of a rough day, and they start telling you about their day, often complaining, and you start to feel worse. By the end of the conversation, you feel quite down, you feel very flat, and you're not really sure why, because I was having a good day before, and this person came and complained to me, and now I feel like now I feel terrible. To me, this explains exactly what's happening here, because if everything is energy, the thoughts, the feelings of that person that you're interacting with are a type of energy. Energy affects other energy, so when that person is bringing their energetic experience to you in that moment, obviously that's going to have an impact on you. That's going to have some sort of effect. And if the experience that they are bringing is a negative one, is them feeling depressed or them feeling sad or them feeling down, then it stands to reason that the impact that's going to have on you is, to some extent at least, to replicate that experience in you, to try and average out, because that's what happens in physics, that's what happens in nature, everywhere that you look. If you introduce something that is hot and something that is cold together, and bearing in mind that cold is not actually a state, cold is an absence of heat. So if you bring something that is hot and something that is cold together, the heat will balance and you end up with two things that are warm. And that same principle applies pretty much across the board. Everything tries to exist in balance. So if you have two people who are interacting with each other and one person is feeling pretty good and is feeling pretty up about themselves, they're pretty happy, they're having a good day, and the other person is very down and is having a rough day and isn't feeling great, naturally that energy is going to want to balance out. So the other person ends up walking away from the conversation feeling better about themselves and better about their day, and you end up feeling worse off. It's just the energy balancing itself out, coming to some level of equilibrium. And this is happening all around us every day, all the time. And it's very easy to observe if you're paying attention and you know what you're looking for. It's easy to observe in ourselves. If you go and walk into, for example, a very busy shopping centre just before Christmas, for example, I can guarantee that you are going to come out of that shopping centre in a worse mood than when you went in. For no apparent reason. In yourself. It's not necessarily any direct experience that you've had, although certainly that can happen. There may be something that has actually triggered you into something that is about feeling worse, but even if nothing happens, you could walk in, just go for a quick walk and then walk back out again, and you will feel worse than when you walked in. And that is simply because the collective experience of everybody in that environment, in that moment, people at that time of year, they're rushing, they're urgent, they're desperately looking for the right thing, or they're freaking out about something, or it's not a particularly relaxed experience for most people. It's not a time of year that most people are doing without stress. And so of course that impacts everyone around them. So this is why I believe you start to see things like mob behaviour, which is a well observed and studied phenomenon where there's a common saying where a mob is only as intelligent as its dumbest member. This is that same thing at play, where when you get a whole bunch of people together, like in a mob, then everything tries to even itself out, everything tries to average, and so you end up with the more intelligent, more measured members of that group often end up dropping down to the average level of where everybody else is at. And if everybody is getting angry and frustrated and wanting to take it out on someone, then you often get normally quite reasonable, well-mannered people doing things that they would never otherwise do, simply because they're getting swept up in that energetic experience. So this is where I think it becomes really important for us to recognize the environment that we are in and to recognize the state that we are in. This is where it's important to develop a level of self-awareness and self-reflection, because the world that we live in, we're always surrounded by people. Unless you live in the middle of nowhere, and even then there's still going to be people around. It's impossible to live your life without being influenced by other people, even if it's just social media or people on television, people you see on YouTube, whatever it is, there's always going to be some sort of energetic experience that we're surrounded by. Sometimes that can be a really positive thing. Sometimes it's about being uplifted, and we can surround ourselves with ones who genuinely want the best for us and who are willing to put positive energy, positive experiences into our lives, even if they don't realise that that's what they're doing. And that's always an amazing thing when you can find yourself in that sort of environment. It's a fantastic thing to experience. But more often than not, the simple reality is that most people are pretty selfish. And that's not necessarily an insult to them, that's survival. To some extent at least, humans need to be selfish in order to survive. You need to look out for number one, and it's hard coded into the vast majority of people, and that's fine. That's not necessarily an insult or in any way meant to disparage people. That's just simply where a lot of people are at. But that same selfishness means that quite often the experience that we have when we are surrounded by other people is not going to be one that's going to be particularly uplifting. It's not going to be something that is about making us the best version of ourselves that we can be. It's going to be about somebody else. It's going to be about the person who's had a bad day, who wants to dump, who wants to just come and put all of their problems on somebody else, and they feel better because they've averaged out the energies by doing so. It's a bit of a slightly more sinister take on the old idea of a problem shared is a problem halved. You start to get a little bit of new context into the idea of how that might work when you start to look at things this way. So this is where that self-awareness becomes a really important piece for everyone to develop, I believe. To really be able to start to see the truth of where we are actually allowing ourselves to be affected by others. And to really give ourselves the opportunity to make what I call the sovereign choice. To allow ourselves to make a choice that isn't influenced by others. Whether that is directly by a person standing in front of you or indirectly by all sorts of things, everything from advertising to movies and TV and books and all sorts of things can all have some sort of impact on us. Making a sovereign choice isn't always as simple as that idea would seem. And I've certainly encountered a lot of people along the way who really struggle with the idea of making a choice entirely for themselves and by themselves once you start to take away the influences that they've become so used to. And this is the thing, we do become very used to this. We become very tolerant of the idea that we are constantly swimming in other people's stuff, other people's thoughts, other people's feelings. Every day, all day really, to some extent at least, we are surrounded by this sort of energy because we're surrounded by other people, and that's just how things are, that's just how people work. So realistically, the only chance we ever actually have in life to start to make those sovereign choices that are completely unaffected by everything around us, be it our environment or the individuals that we interact with, the only way we can ever actually do that is to become fully aware of those influences in the first place. We need to fully understand what it is that we're being impacted by, where these influences are coming from on a daily basis. If we don't understand what it is that's affecting us, we have no possible way of being able to stop those influences. We wouldn't have any possibility of actually negating their impact on us. I do plan on doing more videos on this topic in the future to expand a little bit on some of these ideas, but for today I just wanted to give a bit of a basic idea of this is a function of how the world works that really I find has been mostly unexplored, and it's the sort of thing that various spiritual teachers and groups have been talking about for thousands and thousands of years. You can go back and find references to this sort of thing, from ancient China, for example, 6,000 years ago. And it's always been viewed as a bit of a kooky idea, it's a little bit nutty, a little bit crazy. More and more now we're starting to see that the science is starting to catch up. It's starting to actually see that, oh, hang on, we just didn't understand how this was possible before. We didn't understand that everything was made up of energy. Everything exists that is made up of energy. Therefore, if something exists, it is made of energy. Well, a thought exists. It's a real thing. You can think it. Therefore, it must be made of energy. Energy affects the world around you. So it is something that I believe that over the next coming decades that science is going to start to catch up with some of these ideas, and we are going to start to see these things explored in more detail. But for now, mostly I just wanted to explore the idea a little bit, just in its most basic form, just to really, I guess, open the idea that there is more going on in the world than we can see most of the time. And a lot of it has some level of impact on us, whether we like it or not. So part of the challenge becomes to learn to see those impacts, to learn to understand what it is that is happening to us, what the forces that we are being subjected to, and what it is that we can do about that, what it is that we can actually do to stop those things from impacting us. Anyway, that's all from me for today. Hopefully something in there was useful for you. As I said, I do plan to do some more videos on this topic moving into the future, on some of the explorations that I've done within myself, some of the things that I have discovered to be true. For now though, take care and goodbye.